In this lesson, we are going to define matter. The definition of matter is fairly simple: anything that has mass and occupies space, so everything around us. In this lesson, we will also look at how we can divide pure substances into elements and compounds. Later, we'll look at how we divide mixtures into homogeneous and heterogeneous mixtures. Matter is all around us whether we can see it or not, whether we're looking at a solid, a gas, or a liquid, whether it's something visible or invisible to the naked eye. All of these things have mass and take up space. Even the smallest of hydrogen atoms has a mass and takes up space, so it's still considered matter. A pure substance is anything that is just one thing. It can be an element such as nitrogen or hydrogen or sodium, or it can be a compound such as sodium chloride or water. Each of these things contains just one of those, therefore it's considered a pure substance. So compounds can have more than one element, but if they are all the units in that sample are exactly the same, then it's considered a pure substance. When we look at elements, we see that they can either be atomic, which is what we see over here for the helium in the balloon, or they can be molecular. The difference is the number of atoms that are grouped together. When we look at an atomic element, we see individual atoms of that substance. All of them are the same, so it's a pure substance, but they're individual atoms not connected to anything else. When we look at molecular elements, what we see is we have two atoms that are the same, and we know they're represented here as the same because they're the same color in the image, but they're connected to one another, that we always find these in a group. So for example, nitrogen, here shown as liquid nitrogen, is a diatomic, meaning it has two atoms. So it is a molecular element. It is still an element because there's only one type of atom, but it's a molecular element because there are two bound together instead of being individual atoms as we see over here with the helium. Compounds contain more than one element, but what we see are the identical molecules in the case of the methane. So here we have CH4, a CH4, CH4, and so on. Notice that all five of these molecules look exactly the same, therefore it's a pure substance because they're identical substances, identical species. If we threw something else in here, a different compound, maybe propane, then we would have to deal with this being a mixture. But since all the units are the same, it is a compound. We also have other types of compounds shown over here on the left. This is actually known as an ionic compound. And we'll talk more about identifying ionic and molecular compounds later, but this is an ionic compound. Notice that we have more than one element, but all of these are in the same pattern. For every sodium, there's one chlorine. We have a fixed ratio between them, and they're all bound together in this kind of continuous array. So this is an ionic compound, and on our right, what we see is a molecular. Now, determining whether something is a molecular or ionic compound requires us to know the type of elements, which we will get to later. You might have also heard this referred to as a covalent compound because it contains covalent bonds. Look at the images below and determine which ones are compounds. Select all that apply in your answer. Looking at A, we see this is a compound because we have two different elements present. And we know there are two different elements because we see that the atoms are colored differently. So the different color represents a different element. When we look at B, we see three different elements bonded together, so that is also a compound. C, compound. Again, different types of atoms connected together. D, we see that this is an element, and in fact, we could call this an atomic element because we have individual atoms not connected to one another. All of the colors are the same, so that represents that these are the same element. For E, this is also an element because both of the atoms are the same, but because there are two attached together, we would call this a molecular element. And then we get to F and we see we have two different types of elements represented. in the molecule, so this is also called a compound.